Welcome to Fascinating Flash. We're diving deep today into something incredibly common, something you might even have in your fridge right now: cola drinks. Specifically, we're going to unpack the difference between the classic sugary versions and their lighter diet counterparts.
Yeah, it's a topic that, touches on daily habits and health concerns for millions. Our mission in this deep dive is really to pull back the curtain on what these drinks are actually made of and examine that big debate around sugar versus artificial sweeteners and see what, the most recent science tells us about their effects on your body.
Exactly. We've reviewed a stack of information looking at ingredients, the ongoing sort of scientific and public debate about the sweeteners, and key research findings, all with the aim of giving you a clearer picture. We want to help you understand what opting for one over the other really means so, you can make choices that feel right for you.
Right. So let's jump right into the most striking difference, the one everyone knows about, the sugar story in regular cola.
Yeah, this is where the numbers really stand out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our sources highlight this immediately. Take a relatively small serving, like about 250 milliliters, which is actually less than a standard can.
Mm-hmm.
That little cup of regular cola contains around 105 calories. And the sugar,
It's significant. Yeah, you're looking at close to 27 grams of simple sugars in just that small portion.
wow, 27 grams. That sounds like, well, a lot. Put that into perspective for us.
Okay, well, think about the recommended daily sugar intake for an adult. That single small serving, it knocks out nearly 30% of that limit. Right there.
30%, just from that little bit.
Yeah. It really adds up incredibly fast if you have more than one or, consume other sugary items throughout the day.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? And the basic health consequences of drinking too much sugary cola are pretty well established, I think. Something we'll dig into a bit more later.
Yeah. Exactly. And that potent sugar hit is precisely why the light or diet versions were created, right? And why they became so popular. Their core promise was pretty straightforward. Give you that familiar cola taste without the sugar and with, well, virtually no calories.
Okay, so the million-dollar question is, how do they actually achieve that sugar-free sweetness?
They swap the sugar out. Basically, they use artificial sweeteners, sometimes called EAs. Aspartame is one that's very commonly used in these drinks.
Yeah.
Been around for a long time.
Artificial sweeteners. Okay. They always seem to be under scrutiny, don't they? Always sparking debate. What did the information we looked at say about their safety? Because that's usually the first question.
Right. And the first thing to understand is that these sweeteners are approved. Major regulatory agencies around the world have approved them. They've been through rigorous testing, and based on that, they're considered safe when consumed within specified limits.
Limits. Okay.
Yeah, they're called acceptable daily intakes, or ADIs. Aspartame specifically has been subject to, well, numerous evaluations over the years, including quite recently at the international level.
So they have the official stamp of approval for use within those limits. But here's where our sources highlight a crucial tension, maybe some different perspectives. You have organizations looking at this from like slightly different angles, right?
Exactly.
Like,
And understanding these different angles is really key. On one hand, you have bodies like the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IRRC. Their role is mainly about hazard identification. They look at whether something could potentially cause cancer under any circumstances based on the available evidence, even if it's limited.
right, potential hazard. And how did the IRRC classify aspartame based on that kind of approach?
Okay, so they classified it as possibly carcinogenic to humans, placing it in their Group 2B.
Group 2B. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it comes with the important caveat that it's based on limited evidence in humans. And there's some supporting evidence from animal studies or how it works biologically. It's definitely distinct from classifications like Group 1, carcinogenic to humans, where there's strong evidence, or Group 2A, probably carcinogenic, stronger evidence than 2B. Group 3 means it's not classifiable because there isn't enough evidence. So Group 2B is actually on the lower end of concern within their system. It signals more research is needed.
That distinction is really important, isn't it? Possibly, based on limited evidence. It's not saying it definitely causes cancer in humans from like normal consumption levels.
Precisely. That's key. And then looking at it from another perspective, you have the Joint FAO-WHO Expert Committee on Food Additives, or JCFA. Their role is more about risk assessment in the real world. So they evaluate the likelihood of harm occurring under typical consumption conditions, and they're the ones who set those acceptable daily intakes, the ADIs we mentioned.
Okay, so JCFA looks at real-world risk. And what was their conclusion after reviewing the evidence on aspartame?
JCFA reaffirmed the existing acceptable daily intake for aspartame. They basically concluded that consuming aspartame within that ADI does not pose a health risk.
Okay, let's put that ADI into real numbers. What is the ADI and what does it actually mean for someone drinking Diet Cola?
So the ADI for aspartame is set at 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. To make that relatable, for an average adult weighing around 70 kilograms or about 154 pounds, you would need to consume well over 9 to 14 standard cans of Diet Cola every single day to even reach that limit.
More than 9 to 14 cans.
Yeah.
Every day. That's a ton.
It really is a huge amount. And remember, that number is based only on the aspartame in the soda. It doesn't account for any other sources of aspartame you might get from other diet foods or drinks.
Right.
So for typical, occasional consumption, you are nowhere near exceeding that safety limit.
Okay, so the regulatory consensus is safe within those defined quite high limits. But our sources also highlighted a more recent development, something adding another layer here. A specific guideline from the World Health Organization, the WHO, has been causing some discussion, right?
Yes, that's right.
They actually discourage using artificial sweeteners like aspartame, not because of immediate safety concerns at the ADI, but as a long-term strategy for controlling body weight.
Which feels, well, counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, lots of people choose these drinks precisely for weight management.
Absolutely. It seems like that's one of their main selling points. So why would the WHO advise against them for that specific purpose?
Well, the WHO guideline suggests that, based on a review of evidence, primarily from observational studies, prolonged use of these sweeteners might not actually be effective for long-term weight loss. And importantly, it could potentially be associated with other undesirable health effects over the long haul.
Like what kind of effects?
They point to findings suggesting a possible link between long-term EA use and an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, certain cardiovascular diseases, and maybe even mortality in adults.
And there was also that emerging research mentioned in the sources about artificial sweeteners and our gut microbiota, that complex community of bacteria in our intestines.
Yes, that's a really fascinating and active area of research right now. There's some evidence suggesting that artificial sweeteners might affect the composition and function of these gut bacteria.
How so?
Well, since our gut microbiota plays a role in all sorts of bodily processes, including metabolism, researchers are exploring whether changes caused by sweeteners could contribute to some of those observed health associations. But the mechanisms aren't fully clear yet, still being studied.
Okay, so just to sort of recap this whole sweetener debate. Regulatory bodies say they're safe at the approved doses, and you'd have to drink an extreme amount to exceed that limit. But the WHO is raising a flag about using them routinely, specifically for long-term weight control, pointing to observational data that suggests potential links to metabolic issues over time, maybe involving effects we don't fully understand yet, like on the gut bacteria.
That captures the real tension perfectly, yeah. Approved for safety within limits, but cautioned against for a very common use case, weight control, because of potential long-term associations seen in broader studies. It's complex.
Okay. Setting aside the sugar and sweetener chemistry for a minute, what other, maybe more straightforward differences did our sources point out between regular and light colas?
Well, one surprising difference for many people is actually the caffeine content.
Oh, caffeine. I hadn't really thought about that. Differing between them, does it?
It often does, yeah. While it can vary by brand and specific product, some light versions actually contain more caffeine than their regular counterparts. Yeah. For example, one source noted a common difference where a 355 milligram can, that's like a standard can, of regular cola might have around 34 milligrams of caffeine, while the light version could have closer to 46 milligrams.
Huh. That's interesting. It's not a massive difference, maybe like an extra shot of espresso over several cans, but it's unexpected.
It is unexpected for many, yeah. And then, of course, there's the most subjective difference, taste.
Yes, the taste.
While companies obviously try very hard to mimic the regular taste, many people do notice a difference. Light versions are often perceived as maybe less rich, or they can leave that specific aftertaste.
Yeah, that famous diet soda aftertaste.
Yeah.
Some people describe it as kind of chemical or metallic.
Precisely that. Very subjective, but definitely a factor for many people.
All right, let's step back and try to look at the overall health implications now, pulling everything together. With regular colas, the picture seems quite clear, widely accepted. Excessive consumption is strongly linked to weight gain, all that sugar, which in turn increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart problems, and, cavities. That sugar feeds bacteria in your mouth.
Yeah, there's no real debate there in the scientific community. The consensus recommendation is pretty clear. Drastically reduce consumption of sugary drinks like regular cola
Mm.
as much as possible.
Okay. Now, the light versions. By eliminating sugar and calories, they seem like a simple fix, maybe a healthier swap. But our sources make it clear they aren't exactly a free pass, are they?
No, definitely not. Besides the points we just discussed about the sweeteners themselves and the WHO guideline, some people do report more immediate physical reactions, things like headaches or maybe digestive upset.
Right. And you mentioned those observational studies earlier, the ones looking at large populations over many years.
Yes, those studies have suggested links between diet drink consumption and a potentially higher risk of something called metabolic syndrome.
Metabolic syndrome. Remind us what that involves.
It's basically a cluster of conditions, things like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, unhealthy cholesterol levels, and excess abdominal fat. And having these together significantly increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes.
And this is a really important, but it's crucial to remember the limitation of those studies, right? Correlation doesn't prove causation.
Absolutely critical point. Yes, it's really hard in those studies to isolate the effect of the diet drink itself from all the other lifestyle factors.
Yeah, like people who drink diet soda might already have lifestyle habits or underlying health conditions that predispose them to these risks anyway. Or maybe they started drinking diet soda because they were already concerned about their weight or health. It gets tangled.
Exactly. It's a very complex web of factors, and disentangling the direct effect of the drink is methodologically challenging in those kinds of observational studies. But the association is there in some research, which is why the WHO guideline raises those concerns about their long-term use specifically for weight management.
Okay, let's revisit the type 2 diabetes connection specifically because it seems a bit different for the two types of cola. With regular cola, the link seems pretty straightforward. High sugar intake leads to weight gain and insulin resistance over time. Clear pathway?
Generally accepted.
But with Diet Cola, if there's no sugar, how could there potentially be a link? According to some of that research the WHO cites, it seems less direct.
That is the puzzle researchers are actively trying to solve. It's definitely more indirect and, frankly, more debated. While sugar-sweetened drinks directly give you calories and sugar that impact blood glucose and weight, the suggested link with diet drinks, as we touched on, involves potential mechanisms that are still being explored.
Like,
Well, things like how artificial sweeteners might affect our body's response to sweetness signals without delivering calories. Does that mess with appetite regulation? Or metabolic responses? Maybe. And then there's the gut microbiota angle again. Could changes in our gut bacteria triggered by sweeteners somehow influence metabolism and inflammation in a way that increases risk over time? It's plausible, but needs more research.
so the takeaway isn't necessarily that Diet Cola causes type 2 diabetes in the same direct way regular cola does, but more that it might not be the magical shield against metabolic problems that people sometimes assume it is just because it's sugar-free.
Exactly. They are definitely not a simple solution or a guarantee to avoid those issues. That's a core message coming through from the information we reviewed.
Okay. And beyond the science and the ingredients list, our sources highlighted another massive, kind of inescapable factor shaping our whole relationship with these drinks: advertising and marketing.
Oh, absolutely. Huge factor. The scale of investment in marketing these products is just staggering. Companies spend millions, billions probably, promoting both regular and diet versions, often using really sophisticated campaigns, targeting young people, specific demographics, using influencers, tying into cultural trends.
You really do see it everywhere you look. It's unavoidable.
And this isn't just about selling drinks right. It powerfully shapes public perception. It normalizes the idea of having a cola frequently, makes it seem like an everyday beverage with a meal on the go as a casual treat, almost like a standard part of modern life.
Yeah, it makes it seem ubiquitous and maybe subconsciously harmless because it's just always there.
Which can easily override caution about the actual health implications we've been discussing.
Okay. So pulling all of this dense information together, the ingredients, the science debate, the marketing influencing, what's the bottom line here? What should someone listening take away about choosing between regular and light cola? Or maybe whether to drink them at all?
Well, the overwhelming consensus from all the material we looked at really points towards moderation for both types. No surprise there, maybe. When you look at what your primary everyday drink should be, the answer is consistently clear and simple. Water.
Water.
Yeah, that's the foundation for daily hydration. There's really no getting around that basic fact.
Water first and foremost.
Okay.
And if you are choosing to have a cola sometimes.
Then the advice would be limit the regular versions as much as you possibly can because of that high sugar content and its clear established risks.
Makes sense. And the light versions.
Light versions can be a useful tool potentially to drastically cut your sugar intake if you're currently drinking a lot of regular soda and want to switch. But, and this is the crucial part, based on that WHO guideline and the ongoing research, don't view them as a healthy drink. You can just consume unlimited amounts of every single day without thinking.
Right. They aren't just flavored water, even if they technically have no sugar or calories.
Yeah. Precisely. They contain other active compounds, these artificial sweeteners, which have different physiological effects. And those effects, especially from long-term heavy use, are still being studied and debated. The science isn't fully settled there.
Okay. So besides water, what other alternatives did the sources mention? For someone maybe looking for a bit more flavor than plain H2O sometimes.
Oh, there are plenty of simple, healthier options. You know, tap water, if it's safe where you live, is always great, available, free. You can easily make your own flavored water at home. Just add slices of fruit like lemon, lime, orange, maybe cucumber, or herbs like mint, even a bit of ginger.
Simple and refreshing, yeah.
Gives you taste without any added sugars or artificial stuff. Unsweetened tea or coffee are also good choices, or maybe with just minimal sugar if you really need it. Skim milk provides nutrients. And 100% natural fruit juices. Well, that can be an option sometimes, but in moderation.
Because they still have a lot of natural sugar, right?
Uh-huh.
Concentrated sugar.
Exactly. Even though it's natural, it's concentrated sugar, so they should be treated somewhat similarly to other sugary drinks in terms of limiting how much you drink. Definitely not a substitute for eating whole fruit.
Gotcha. Not at all. Okay, so to wrap things up then, our deep dive today suggests neither regular nor light colas are really ideal as your go-to daily drinks. Understanding the distinct downsides of each, the high sugar load of regular, and the unresolved questions plus potential long-term associations with light versions, it seems to point towards consuming both only occasionally and in moderation.
That really seems to be the most sensible path forward based on the current body of information. Keep them as occasional treats, not staples. And perhaps the final, maybe more provocative idea that comes out of reviewing all this, one that goes beyond just which cola to pick, is about our fundamental relationship with sweetness itself.
Tell me more about that.
Well, that WHO guideline, the one touching on long-term use for weight control, kind of hints at this broader issue. Maybe the biggest challenge isn't just swapping sugar for sweetener, but actually re-educating our palates. Learning to need less intense sweetness overall, whether it comes from sugar or artificial sources.
So reducing our overall dependence on that super sweet taste.
Exactly. Getting used to less sweet tastes in our daily food and drinks could potentially be a more profound and maybe more beneficial change in the long run for our health.
That's a really fascinating thought to leave with you listening. Could lowering your baseline expectation for sweetness be the real key? Something to consider, perhaps.
Indeed. Food for thought.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter to you.
Until then.